What we'll be talking about today is the journey that we take to going to the grocery store and then ending up in our kitchen. And so what does this mean? It means, looking at the psychology behind healthy grocery shopping, learning a bit more about nutrition labels, and then we're going to kind of end off with looking at, how we track what we eat, learning if that's really a good way, or what's a good way to track how we eat and if that's really beneficial for us. And then we'll end off with just a little bit of a recap. So to start off with, the psychology behind healthy grocery shopping. So I'm sure many of us have seen this Canada's Food Guide before, and we've kind of seen that, there is like a different amount of food that we should eat that pertains to different type of food groups. But often what I find especially is that it's really hard for people to kind of create something like this, because we don't just eat things in isolation, right? If say we're making pasta, we're not just going to cook all our pasta and put it onto a quarter of the plate and then cook the sauce and put it on another half of the plate. We're going to kind of mix things up. So one of the recommendations that I've seen people kind of take note of is before they even go to shop, when they're creating their grocery list, they'll keep this in mind, where half of their grocery list might just be like fruits and vegetables, a quarter of it would be like proteins, and a quarter of it would be grains. And then of course water or a drink of your choice, but preferably water. So maybe that's something that we can kind of incorporate into our, grocery lists before we even start, and see if that helps us. The other thing to note is that maybe when we're making our foods, we could plan out some of our meals before we even go to the grocery shop. And we'll take a look at how we can do this a little bit later in the presentation. But an idea could be to have meals in mind before we go to the grocery store, because then that way we kind of have just ingredients in focus instead of, oh, let me go to this aisle and then figure out what's going on, and let me go to this aisle and figure out what's going on. We've also seen that there could be some sort of research shown with the flavor and the color of food to evoke some sort of emotion. And so, although this is a lot more like psychology based, you can kind of note that, there might be some types of foods that might help you feel, more full, or help you feel better overall or happier overall, which could then also help maybe for folks who might find themselves, gravitating to eating when they're stressed. They could try to maybe incorporate some sort of meals that are maybe more brown in color, which could help convey more of a passive or relaxed state. So, something to take note of, but it's just important to realize that there are marketing tactics that are in play. And so what do I want you to take away from this? The takeaway here is to try to follow the recommendations of the Canada's Food Guide, but then also, have your goals in mind. So figure out what you want to eat before you get to the store. Obviously, don't shop when we're hungry, because then we're all going to go and find all the chips that are our favorite and find all those drinks and figure out, all those unhealthy snacks and eat those. So, maybe after a meal, after we're full and we're satiated, is a good time to go grocery shopping. Keep your health goals in mind. So figure out how many calories you should be consuming or you want to consume, and have a very goal-oriented shopping experience, not a browsing or perusing one. And I know when we shop at Costco, they do really well with their marketing tactics, because I'm sure you've realized that they put all the bread and the fruits and the vegetables and the rotisserie chicken all the way at the back. And so they make us walk through the entire Costco store, make us walk through all those free samples to get to the back. And by that time, we've already picked out 10 different things that we've seen that seem interesting. So it's just important to take note of that before we even, get to the grocery store, that these are the things that we want to go get, and so that's what we're going to have in mind. And with that in mind, I'll pass it off to, I believe, I'm not sure how you pronounce your name, but is it Nisa?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, awesome.
All right, so we're going to do a quick look at nutrition labels right now. So before we get into that, we wanted to kind of touch on the negative association with carbohydrates. So as you guys probably know, carbs do have not the best reputation due to the link between a lot of high carb diets and the prevalence of type 2 diabetes, obesity, and other diseases. So high carbs are often associated with negative things. But because of this really negative reputation, a lot of times people try to avoid carbs as much as possible in their diet, which is very unreasonable, and it's not necessarily even necessary to do so, because carbs are a really great source of energy. It's just important to be considering the quality of the carb you're consuming when you're eating it. So carbs are really easy to source, they're not too expensive, and they add a lot of bulk to a meal. So it's important to kind of have a nuanced approach when you're choosing which carb you're going to consume. So that takes us into how not all carbs are metabolized equally. So on the right side, we have a picture of apple juice versus apples. So the apple juice isn't going to be digested in the same way or metabolized as fast as the apple itself, because the apple itself has a lot of fiber in it. It's nutrient rich, versus the apple juice on the left side is 5 apples in one. So it's going to be digested a lot faster, and it's going to raise your blood sugar much higher. And we also have bread versus quinoa. So complex carbs, so we're looking at stuff like whole grains and legumes, so beans. These will not affect blood sugar in the same way as a highly processed and refined sugar. So something like fruit juice, or when you go to the bakery and you buy some cookies and pastries, or even a French fry. So something to consider can be the glycemic index when purchasing a food. And what the glycemic index is it will basically tell you how quickly digested and absorbed the food is, and how quick it will cause your blood sugar to rise. Now, unfortunately, glycemic index isn't listed on a product, but you can kind of know what is high in glycemic index if you take a look at the ingredients. So if you avoid foods that contain high fructose corn syrup, a lot of refined grains, or cane sugar, typically those foods are what will raise your blood sugar the highest. So when you're shopping, if you take a look at the ingredients list and you're able to avoid something like that, that would be optimal, because then you know that the carb that you're getting is really high quality and it's going to be good for you and nutrient dense as well. So on this slide, we have a food comparison. So this is the typical label that you might see when you're grocery shopping. And on the left side, we have it for quinoa, which could be a healthy lunch choice for you. And on the right side, we have it for a Tim Hortons bagel. So on the left side here, we can see that the calories for a quarter of a cup are about 170. And we're keeping in mind that with that, it will also expand. So this says it's for 47 grams. So this is going to be a quarter of a cup dry, but probably much higher when it's actually cooked. So it's going to be a very filling meal. You also can see that the total carbs in the whole quarter of a cup dry quinoa, it's 32 grams. So I would say always try to take a look at the carb section down here, as well as the dietary fiber. So in quinoa, we have a few grams of dietary fiber, which is going to slow down the processing of this carb in your blood. So your blood sugar won't be affected as quickly if you have something that is more high fiber. And there's also some protein in here. So it's going to be an overall very filling meal. Versus with the bagel, we see there's 290 calories. So already we're almost double the calories, and this is just a plain bagel. People usually will pair a bagel with something like cream cheese or butter, which is going to make it even higher calorie. And then we can also see the total carbohydrates is 58. So we have 58 versus 32. And it's more likely that the quinoa is going to fill you up a lot more, and you're going to get a lot less of a blood sugar rise from that. For dietary fiber, we have 2 grams. So that's 2 grams versus 5. And then for sugars, we have 4 grams. So that's another thing, is that a lot of the times people will only look at the carb section, but it's important to see where those carbs are coming from. Are they coming from the sugar, or are they coming from fiber? And that's kind of important to look at, just because automatically, if the sugar content is high, you're going to be seeing some blood sugar rise there. So one thing that we can do to kind of combat the influence of carbs on our blood sugars is we can consider pairing our carbs with healthy fats and high protein foods. So one of the big mistakes that people make is that they might eat a bowl of cereal for breakfast and then wonder why their sugar might have spiked after that. So when you're not pairing carbs with a balanced meal, they're going to be very quickly digested in your body. But if you can manage to pair it with some healthy protein and fat, that will really reduce your overall blood sugar. So like, for example, one study found that people who ate the low glycemic index carbs, so to refresh, the low glycemic is just anything basically that's not refined, doesn't have added sugar, or doesn't have high fructose corn syrup. When they ate the low GI carbs and they paired it with high protein foods, they showed greater EGFR, which you guys might have seen on your blood test results if you go to Dr. Curnew's clinic, and also improved biomarkers of renal disease. So it is really a great way to kind of get your carbs in while also knowing that you're still going to be all right and your blood sugar won't spike too much, sorry. And high protein and low GI diets also increase body fat loss. And this type of diet, it can be really similar to a Mediterranean diet, because lots of low GI foods are part of the Mediterranean diet. So here on the left, we have a really great example of a balanced breakfast that would be unlikely to really affect your blood sugar too much. So we have a slice of whole grain toast. So already we're not going for white or whole wheat, we're going for whole grain. And on top of that, we have some avocado, which will provide you with a lot of healthy fats. And then 1 egg, which it should be fine to have 1 egg a day, because this will all provide you with a really balanced meal. Yeah, so now we have sugar-free versus sugar added on no sugar added products. So if you've been out shopping recently, you've probably seen that there's been like a very big increase in products that you might see that say sugar-free or no sugar added. So sugar-free products, they can be a great alternative to regular candy, like, or sweets. If you have been missing out on something every once in a while, it can be great to have an option that you know won't really spike your blood sugar. But the term sugar-free and no added sugar can also be a bit of a misleading statement that they use to trick consumers into buying the product. So real sugar-free sweeteners include like stevia derived from the stevia leaf, or monk fruit powder. And there are also sugar alcohols. These are all things that you can see in the ingredient list when you buy a sugar-free product. So these sweeteners are really often used in those type of sugar-free candies, or beverage alternatives, and they have a very low glycemic index. So they're hardly absorbed by the intestine, so they won't raise your blood sugar. Just one thing to be aware of when consuming like a sugar-free candy is to make sure you're not consuming it a lot, because I know a lot of these sugar-free sweeteners have side effects like laxative side effects, so that can be hard on the stomach. Now, one way in which you might be misleaded, and this is why it's always important to check the nutrition label, is that a lot of times companies will write no sugar added, and you will think, okay, if they're saying no sugar added, there's no sugar in it. But a lot of fruit juice companies will even say no sugar added, and it's because technically they don't add sugar. So it is a bit misleading, because something like fruit juice will already have a high sugar content and they don't even need to add any more sugar, but they'll write no sugar added to kind of get you to purchase their product. So on the left, we can see something that is sugar-free. So we have sugar-free Reese's, and we have the nutrition label for it. So sugar-free Reese's are sweetened with an artificial sweetener, so they're sweetened with a sugar alcohol. So I would say this is something that you can indulge in every once in a while, as long as you're making sure to not eat too much because of the side effects. So we have Total sugar 0 grams, but sugar alcohol 12 grams. So these sugar alcohols will rarely affect your sugar. And then on the right, we have a no sugar added juice, but you can see that on the label, there's 23 grams of sugar in 1 cup. So that is quite a hefty amount of sugar, and especially because the product claims it's no sugar added, it can be a bit confusing.
I also wanted to add something very interesting, but it's also really important to take into account how the nutrition label is created for you. And I know that Nisa was just talking a little bit about this, but I'll give you an example. So um, I believe in the States, the Tic Tacs that we like, those little breath mint Tic Tacs, um, on the nutrition label itself, it'll say that it's like 0% sugar or zero sugar. And the reason is because in the States, you don't have to report any sugar if uh, the sugar itself weighs less than 0.5 grams. And conveniently, I guess, every single Tic Tac is 0.49 grams. So since they're under the 0.5 grams, even though it's almost all sugar, they can say that there are zero sugar or they have no sugar because they fall under the 0.5. So, and of course, it's based on serving size, but they're going to say that their serving size is only 1 Tic Tac. So that's how they can kind of get around, get around it. So very important to take a look at all these tricks that might be happening. But also it's important to just, look at the ingredients themselves and take a good note of the ingredients themselves and see if, those products are products that you can understand, and also those products are healthy for you. Just go to the next slide there.
Yeah, and finally, we have the low-fat diet. So is the low-fat diet the best option? So when you go grocery shopping, along with seeing a lot of sugar-free products, you might see a lot of products that say low fat on them. Now, these products may not always be the best option to choose, just because you have to be reading the ingredient label and seeing what type of other fillers they're putting in. So a lot of low-fat products will have a really high sodium content or a higher sugar content to make up for the lack of fat and kind of make the taste better. So you have to always be looking out for that. And with the low fat diets, I would say that a common misconception that we see a lot is that high cholesterol foods will increase your cholesterol. Now, high cholesterol foods aren't necessarily the main reason your cholesterol may be increasing. It can also mainly be the saturated fats and trans fats in your food. So instead of cutting out all fat, it's really important to target the saturated and trans fats, because those are what are really what are going to be really harmful to you. So saturated and trans fats are in things such as hydrogenated oil in the diet. So if you're eating like a lot of fried food, that's going to be bad for both your heart as well as your blood sugars, because it is highly linked to increased risk of heart attack. But if you can try to look for foods that are rich in unsaturated fat, instead of cutting fats all out of your diet, that could be a really great option, because then you can focus more on the quality of food you're consuming instead of leaning towards those low fat products with those claims. So this kind of links back to the Mediterranean diet. I found that this was a diet that really well represented eating healthy fats and consuming that in your daily meals. So it incorporates a lot of olive oil, avocados, nuts and seeds, and lean meats, and also fatty fish for like your omega-3. So these are all great for you to consume, and they're not really something that would be considered dangerous to either your heart or your blood sugar. The Mediterranean diet is a very heart-friendly, sugar-friendly diet, and it's supported by a lot of physicians. Another way that you can do this is just kind of making small adjustments. So instead of going for a low fat diet, you're eating an egg and butter in the morning and you're saying, no, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to be on a low fat diet. Instead, consider eating your egg with something like avocado instead, or using olive oil to cook it instead. This will help you get a lot of those healthy fats once again, so that you don't feel like you have to cut out all of these fats from your diet. And in a study that did compare the Mediterranean diet to the traditional low-fat diet, it was shown that the Mediterranean diet had a much greater success in like reducing your overall body inflammation and improving the symptoms and markers of heart disease. So the low fat diet is not always the best. And I know that the low fat diet claims are often very high sodium, like on a nutrition label, or they'll be really high sugar. So it's important to just try and improve the quality of your food instead of looking at like cutting out these really big food groups and macronutrients. I'm all done now and I will pass it on to the next.
Perfect. Okay. So the last thing that we're going to talk about is tracking what we eat and figuring out, how we can track what we eat. So with this in mind, we're going to basically, what we have to realize is there's a lot of different types of food trackers out there. And here we can see a kind of like a good example of a lot of different, apps and websites and technologies that will allow us to track our foods. So what we're going to talk about in this section is, how beneficial is it to track what we eat? Is it beneficial to track what we eat? What could be the pros and cons of all of these different sort of food tracking aids, and what we can take away from this discussion and kind of apply to our lives. So we'll start with something called SouperSage. And so SouperSage is basically a website that allows us to track our food intake. And it provides you with a nice little breakdown of each of the specific macro and micronutrients. So just to take an example of what this means, a macronutrient would be things like your proteins and your carbohydrates and your fats. And a micronutrient might be something very specific. So it could be like the amount of calcium some sort of food might have. And when we do this, when we can kind of put in all of this information, we can also track what we're putting in our mouths by figuring out, is this good for us? Is this too much? Is this going to be too much sodium? Is this going to be too much fat to put in one day? And they also give you conceived recipes that you can download and make changes to in order to understand, what types of food you might enjoy a bit more. I think the best way to show this is to just show you the website. I know we talked a little bit about it last time, and I believe some of you might have been here for that, but I think that it was a very important part of the discussion last month, and so I just wanted to bring it back and show everybody. Give me 1 second to pull it up here.
They don't want their picture on there, though. They probably don't want their picture.
Yeah.
Awesome. All righty. Let me share my screen again.
But that they show oats, and the oats, 1 cup of oats showed far more calories than 1 package of that instant stuff, and I'm surprised about that.
All righty. So here we are. So this is the first website that we wanted to talk about. It's called SouperSage. But if we scroll down, we can kind of see how they can give you a nice breakdown of the different types of foods that we're ingesting, from straight up just like the calories and the carbohydrates, like the macronutrients like carbohydrates and fats. And then we can see a lot of the specific things that we might need in our daily meals, such as the vitamin A and the calcium and the iron. So it's just important to note that something like this does exist. The downside of this is that it does not really have an app. And so I know a lot of people like to use apps instead to track what they eat. And so it might be a little bit more difficult to do so with this one.
So Nirme, if I can just add, the other great thing about SouperSage is you can actually put in your own recipe
Mhm.
and see the not only macro but micronutrients. So if you start with a family tradition that is loaded with fats and all the wrong things, and you start playing with it, you can use SouperSage to see how successful you've been. So as an example, I use SouperSage to try to get the balance of all the macro micronutrients for the soup that I showed last month. And lastly, for me, I've really got to track calcium. So this really helped me be able to really zero in on the micronutrients that aren't always shown on traditional nutrition labels. Just a thought.
It's a
Good.
good
That's a
point
good.
because you want to be at around 1,000 milligrams of elemental calcium. Remind us again, what are some of the, if you want to cut down on your dairy, what's some of the foods that are rich in calcium again?
The ones I tend to go to are kale. I'm a big user of kale and spinach in my meals, but I have to confess I do go to dairy as well as a premier shake. So, because it's easy in the morning, I mix the shake with the milk, and I've basically got my daily requirement for calcium. So
I think broccoli and bok choy has quite a bit of calcium as well, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
Yeah.
I've forgotten
That's true.
about those.
Does
We like
anybody
to
know
think
what
of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead. What are some of the choices of calcium everybody has?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that, calcium is one of those, is something that we probably are somewhat deficient. And there's an excellent video that we have on osteoporosis diet, so to take a look at some point in time. But I always have to keep looking this up. What else, Nurme, rich, or anybody else rich on calcium?
I would say, first off, as you mentioned, all those leafy green vegetables are a great, good place to start off with. And then one that's really underused are those like lentils and seeds. So almonds, I'm sure, are really, really great at, getting you the calcium you need. But then also things just like poppy seeds or sesame seeds, chia seeds, if you can incorporate those things into, say, your smoothies, or even your salads, it would be a good way to up that calcium.
And the other micronutrient we have to think about for many of us is iron. Okay? And remember iron, where iron comes from some other sources. So again, if you want to cut back your meat, what's some of the other sources of iron? Anybody?
Well, spinach is one that comes to mind, but you do better if you actually cook it versus eating it raw, believe it or not.
So the other thing too that helps cause iron absorption is vitamin C. So if anybody's taking iron pills, you should probably just take them 3 times a week on an empty stomach with a glass of orange juice, or even better yet, orange. But you're right, it's better to get your micronutrients from food. So what are some of the foods that people are thinking about?
I know quinoa is pretty good actually for iron, and also again, like seeds, like pumpkin seeds and legumes are pretty good as well.
Yeah, exactly. So white beans, for instance, different beans. I think one of the things we undervalue beans, and one of the things, if you're trying to keep your calories down and your saturated fat down and things of nature, I think beans are something that are being underemphasized. So think about adding like a cup of beans every day, or a half a cup of beans to like salads and things. Add your chia seeds and try to have more broccoli and those green leafy vegetables. Wonderful. Thank you. Take it away.
Awesome. Yeah.
Anybody else
So
have any good ideas for micronutrients that they think about?
I mean, omega-3s, I always go to walnuts. I have 15 grams of walnuts in the morning. The other one I go to is sweet potato for vitamin A.
Very good. Always think about calories as well. So nuts, unfortunately, are rich in calories. But you trying to keep the healthier fats to a limited amount. Great.
Yeah, well, that's
Fine.
why I weigh them, right? One of the other things we haven't talked about is using something like a kitchen scale, right? Our eyes deceive us, you know?
Yeah.
So using a kitchen scale until you get to know, you know, the exact portion that you're dishing out really works. And there are nutritional scales that, so for example, I can put in my walnuts and I know over time that it's 15 grams, but you know, you put in how much you've got on the plate, on the scale, and then you put in the name of the product you're using. And not only does it tell you the weight, of course, but it also tells you the nutrition of what you've got. So that helps.
So actually, good for you. And I think that Nurmi mentioned quinoa. That's one of those foods that packed with a lot of nutrients, and calorie density is not too bad. Now, oat is quite an interesting food. Does anybody? Well, I always think of oats as having, you know, high degree of fiber. And remind me the micronutrient content. Anybody know how much calcium is in there, or iron, or other, or protein? Anybody know?
Yeah, hang on, I'm just looking it up here.
Great. See, I can never. It's one of those things I keep reading and I keep forgetting. But one of the things is that. Thank you. Go ahead. Tell us about.
Actually, I'm surprised I'm not finding oats on here, but I can tell you bok choy, as an example, has 106 grams per. So 106 milligrams per 100 grams. So
Of calcium.
yeah.
Yeah.
And walnuts, you know, 97, olive 88. Sesame seeds top it out at 975, but like you say, you wouldn't want to eat 100 grams of sesame seed. That would blow your calorie budget for the day.
Great. Okay. Yeah, keep looking up oatmeal. I think, or oats and things like that. Can anybody else look up oats? Because I think it's a reasonable compromise between calories, fiber, and micronutrients.
I see here that with oats, pretty high in the B vitamins, and then also manganese and phosphorus, which I haven't
Okay.
really heard too much about. But I think the big thing there is the fiber. You know,
Okay.
the high fiber is very, very important.
Fair enough. Great. All right. No, not too much in calcium then. Okay, great.
Awesome. Yeah. So here we have MyFitnessPal, and I think this is the one that a lot of people have heard about as kind of like the introduction to the world of tracking your foods. And the reason why a lot of people have heard about this is because they've made a lot of different things very, very easy to get a very good rough estimate of how much we're eating. The pros with this is that unlike other places, it's a little bit easier to add the types of meals that we're eating because they do have a very big database. And so I know the other day I was testing this out, and I went to my kitchen and I was just like checking the foods that I had lying around in my kitchen, and I saw that we had this type of bagel. And so instead of just typing in bagel and clicking the first link that pops up, I could search by the company of bagel that I had and the type of bagel. So I had I think it was called Dempster's Everything Bagel. And so I was able to put that specifically into the search bar there and find that exact type of bagel and get all the nutrients for that type of bagel. And the other interesting thing is if you were to get, I think, the paid version, you can also just take a picture of what you're eating and it'll scan that for you. And so you don't have to put in every single item that you're eating individually, but you can kind of put in the foods that you're eating without typing it in by just taking a picture of it, and the app will do it for you. So that's something that's very interesting to note about, and I can show you the website here. Here we go. So this is what it will basically look like, and here we have the. So if we were to search up, I guess, the oats, that's a good way to start off with. We can figure out, the company of oats that we have. So say we've got the Quaker oats, which I think are a very, very popular one. We'll be able to then take a look at, the breakdown, the basic breakdown here, how it fits into the daily goals that we might have set up for ourselves, and take a look at some of those finer nutritional information. But what we will see here is that they don't really give us all those micronutrients that other places might give us. So we can see that here the oats are a pretty good source of iron, actually. Not so much calcium, but definitely iron. So it's something interesting to just take a note of. And the nice thing here is that you have the website, and then they also have the app, and you can use whatever you prefer. Awesome. Okay. And then we also have Chronometer, which is a very easy to use software that will track your micronutrients, and they have really good support. It's really easy to get help when something might go wrong or where it might be hard to use something. But here's the app itself, and we can see here that let's take a look. That basically you can put in your information, and you can also put in like your exercise, and it'll minus calories for how much exercise you're doing. And that way you can work towards keeping on track to the goal that you might have set. And you can also do that with MyFitnessPal as well. But it's just another app where you can kind of see the micronutrients really well and track your calories and your health data. Okay. The last thing I wanted to show is called Eat This Much. So Eat This Much, I really like to show it because it puts your diet, it makes your diet very easy to follow. So you can figure out, what type of diet you want to follow. I know Nisa was just talking a little bit about the Mediterranean diet. So let's pick the Mediterranean diet. We can figure out how many calories we want to eat and in how many meals we want to eat these calories. So let's stick to 2,000 calories. And let's stick to 4 meals. And if we click generate, what we'll be able to see down here now are the different types of meals that we can eat in a day. So here we have a morning omelet, and we can, if we just kind of hover over it, we can kind of see very quickly the calories, the carbs, the fats, even an estimated price, which is really interesting, and then how long it takes to create. And you can almost see the entire recipe as well there. So remember how we were talking earlier about, having a plan when we go shopping? This could be an easy way to figure out what we want to eat and then create the plans to what we want to eat. Say there's something that we don't really like say we don't like mushrooms and we don't want to include this part of the meal for our lunch. We could actually replace that with something else. So now we have a new option. And it'll try to stick with the calorie limits that have been created. So 2,000 calories in the 4 meals. If we want to not have tuna with avocado, we could switch that out for a strawberry yogurt smoothie. And this way, it'll allow you to, again, continue to keep your, hit your goals for your calories, the amount of meals you want to eat, and the type of diet you want to put yourself on. So this is something to obviously check out. It's called eatthismuch.com, and you can kind of use it to plan your grocery shopping because you can create your meals before you go to the grocery shop. Okay. Last thing we want to touch on is the effectiveness of these apps. And so if you were to just take a broad overlook of all these apps, what you would notice is that they track your calorie and your food intake, and they mostly provide a breakdown of your macro, and some will also provide a breakdown of your micronutrients. But it's important to also realize that these apps aren't the be-all end-all. They aren't perfect. There's been a couple of recent studies that will show that these apps might also have a negative influence or a negative consequence on some people. because, once we just start seeing those numbers on the screen, for some people, it might become very tempting, and it might become almost like a way to just focus on those numbers. So it might become really tempting to focus just on the numbers and then avoid a lot of healthy foods because they might not fit perfectly with the types of meals that we want to create for ourselves. And these apps that are usually focused on like losing weight and keeping a better body shape might lead to some unhealthy eating habits if we were to obsess over the app and obsess over the numbers. And so it's important to realize that. Yes, go ahead. Somebody have a question?
Weight loss thing? Oh, I want to see what
I think I
doctor
made
looks
a
like.
mistake.
No, I want to see what the doctor looks like.
Counselor, I
Cancel
think
what?
I'm
Oh. Oh, okay, there we go. Awesome. Yeah, so it's just really important to realize that these apps should be, taken with a little bit of a grain of salt, because although it's really important to focus on what we're eating, track, what we're eating, we don't want to do that with a negative detriment to our mental health and to ourself, and kind of focus just on those numbers. And so it's really important to find the balance. And so for some people, the balance might be that one of those apps that doesn't show you as much of the numbers, but still gives you a general sense of what you're eating, might be a better bet. But for some people who are very focused on those numbers, without those numbers becoming some sort of a detriment to them, it might be really important to track their micronutrients. Or say, for example, your sodium levels are a little bit too high, and you really want to focus on just that, then it could be really important to look at something like a chronometer or SouperSage, where you can track those micronutrients. So the goal is to find something that works for you, but don't, tempt over those numbers too much. Okay. So we want to end off with now what? We've learned a little bit about, how we can go to the grocery store and come back with a good amount of foods that are pretty healthy, how we can look at nutrition labels and not get deceived by a lot of the different marketing tactics that are involved in those nutrition labels. So what's the next step? Well, you can join our 30 and 30 challenge. And so this is a challenge that we've been going on for this year, where we're looking to lose 30 pounds of weight in 30 weeks. And the reason we've come up with this number, for anybody that's just joining us for the first time this session, is that we've seen a lot of these trials, especially ones out of the UK called the DIRECT trial, where patients who lost 30 pounds of weight were able to put their diabetes into remission. I believe it was like 87% of people were able to put their diabetes into remission for that weight group. And there is like a dose-dependent effect. So losing more weight was more likely to put your diabetes into remission, to the point where you wouldn't need any more medications, and your body would be able to help control your sugar levels. You can also join Dr. Curnew's Facebook group. It's called Dr. Curnew's Crew. And Laura, you had a great idea there to put all those links in the events page, which we'll try to get to do. And that way it'll be really easy to access the links to the different types of webinars, but to also join the different groups. And so if you're interested in more of like a cooking show group, we have the dinner club and the Sunday cooking club. If you're more interested in motivation and resilience, we have clubs that are focused on that. And so sometimes it's all about finding the right club for you. You can also watch a lot of our previous videos. They're all on YouTube. If you just search up Dr. Curnew's name and then search up diabetes management or sugar hour or sugar morning, it should come up. Check out Lori's soup recipe. So if you were to look at last month's video, you'd be able to see Lori's soup recipe there, and it was a great success. So it'd be really nice to see if anybody could check that out. And the other thing is to sometimes, if we are indulging in foods that we might not perceive as to be the most healthiest, to be accountable and to hold ourselves accountable. And so this could be in the form of taking a photo of what we're eating every time we eat. That way, it's stored somewhere, or having an accountability partner and working on this challenge, with someone else. By sharing those, foods of photos that we're eating, we might be subconsciously making healthier food decisions, because now we have that external motivation of, oh, this person is going to hold me accountable and I don't want to mess up. But if you're a person that really likes internal motivation, you can also find other different ways to stay accountable and to hold yourself accountable. This is just one of those different ways that you can do so. A lot of you might have gotten the Ocean form, especially if this was the first time you're visiting the club. So fill out the Ocean form and spend just 5 minutes a day learning something new, doing something new. If you want to discuss your progress on a one-on-one call with either myself or some of the more experienced volunteers in this Sugar Hour Club, let us know. We'll be able to book you in for those calls, and we'll be able to talk to you on a one-on-one basis and see how you're progressing on your journey. And the last step is to obviously have fun, because this is a work in progress. It's not going to be, fixed in one day. And we also don't want to burn out by, starting 50 new things at once and then eventually not being able to do any of them and reverting back to our old habits. We want to build a very sustainable way to continue to live a healthy life. And so the best way to do that is to have fun in the journey it takes to becoming a more healthier version of yourself. All righty, so that was everything for today.